Many of you have read to your children or grandchildren the Dr. Seuss book about how the Grinch stole Christmas. Some very clever person took that poem's meter and wrote some new, very timely words. Since Memorial Day was just last week, it seems appropriate to enjoy this new version now. Every you down in Uville liked the U.S. a lot, but the Binch who lived far east of Uville did not. The Binch hated U.S., the whole U.S. way. Now don't ask me why, for nobody can say. It could be his turban was screwed on too tight, or the sun from the desert had beaten too bright, but I think the most likely reason of all may have been that his heart was 2 sizes too small. But whatever the reason, his heart or his turban, he stood facing Uville, the part that was urban. "They're doing their business," he snarled from his perch. "They're raising their families, they're going to church. They're leading the world and their empire is thriving. I must keep the S's and U's from surviving." Tomorrow, he knew, all the U's and S's would put on their pants and their shirts and their dresses. They'd go to their offices, playgrounds, and schools, and abide by their U and S values and rules. And then they'd do something he liked least of all. Every U down in Uville, the tall and the small, would stand all united, each U and each S, and they'd sing Uville's ballad, "God bless us, God bless." All around their twin towers of Uville they'd stand, and their voices would drown every sound in the land. "I must stop that singing," Binch said with a smirk. And he had an idea that might work. The Binch stole some U airplanes in U morning hours and crashed them right into the Uville Twin Towers. "They'll wake to disaster," he snickered so sour. "And how can they sing when they can't find a tower?" The Binch cocked his ear as they woke from their sleeping, all set to enjoy their U wailing and weeping. Instead, he heard something that started quite low, and it built up quite slow, but it started to grow. And the Binch heard the most unpredictable thing, and he couldn't believe it. They started to sing. He stared down at Uville, not trusting his eyes. What he saw was a shocking, disgusting surprise. Every U down in Uville, the tall and the small, was singing without any towers at all. He hadn't stopped Uville from singing. It sung. For down deep in the hearts of the old and the young, those twin towers were standing, called hope and called pride. And you can't smash the towers we hold deep inside. So we circle the sites where our heroes did fall, with a hand in each hand of the tall and the small, and we mourn for our losses while knowing we'll cope, for we still have inside that U pride and U hope. For America means a bit more than tall towers. It means more than wealth or political powers. It's more than our enemies ever could guess. So may God bless America. Bless us. God bless. Thank you. Now, this is a bonus that Peggy didn't know I was going to do. But you are such a responsive audience that in spite of the sense of trepidation I feel whenever I do this thing, and I've only done this for one other audience. I'm going to do it. Some of you know that I narrate books for a couple of companies, mostly the company called Recorded Books. And 21 years ago, when I went to audition in New York to be a narrator, they had me read various things for about an hour. And then the studio manager brought me this, and she said, I don't want you to take any time to study this. I want you to just read it into the microphone, and I'm going to record it. This is what I had to read. Petey was a snake, only so big. Petey lived in a pit with his mother. One day, Petey was hissing in the pit when his mother said, Petey, don't hiss in the pit. Go outside the pit to hiss. So Petey went outside the pit to hiss. He was hissing all around when he finally leaned over and hissed in the pit. Petey's mother heard Petey hissing in the pit and said, Petey, if you must hiss in a pit, go over to Mrs. Potts' pit and hiss in her pit. Petey went over to Mrs. Potts' pit to hiss in her pit, but Mrs. Pot was not at home, so he hissed in her pit anyway. While Petey was hissing in Mrs. Potts' pit, Mrs. Pot came home and found Petey hissing in her pit. She said, Petey, if you must hiss in a pit, don't hiss in my pit. Go to your own pit and hiss. This made Petey very sad, and he cried all the way home. When Petey got home, his mother saw him crying and said, Petey, what's the matter? Petey said, I went over to Mrs. Pot to hiss in her pit, but Mrs. Pot wasn't home, so I hissed in her pit anyway. Mrs. Pot came home and found me hissing in her pit and said, Petey, if you must hiss in a pit, go to your own pit and hiss. Don't hiss in my pit. This made Petey's mother very angry. Why, that mean old lady, she said. I knew Mrs. Pot when she didn't have a pit to hiss in. Thank you.
I certainly did not know he was going to do that.
Now, one more thing. You have probably been wondering about this piece of vegetation between the stands. 32 or 33 years ago, we brought back from North Carolina a little southern magnolia tree. It was about 4 feet high. And we planted it in our backyard. And for 8-10 years, it would lose all its leaves in the winter and would look terrible. It grew, but it never had any flowers or anything on it. About 12 or 13 years ago, it started to bloom. Now it's about, I would say, 35 to 40 feet high. And it produces big white flowers that sometimes when they fully open up are this big around, and they smell wonderful. And tonight, we are going to make a presentation of this first magnolia blossom of the year to Joyce and Jonas Green. Since I took your chair, I'm going to let you get the first whiff. That's sweet. That's sweet. There you are, Joe. Yes, you can keep the jug too. I feel a little bit bad about the Mitchner thing.